I'm not exactly sure why I went out there alone. It was late June, and most of my friends were either traveling or busy with work. I'd just been laid off from my job a week earlier, and something in me, maybe the need for space or the simple desire to disconnect, pushed me to go camping by myself for a few days. I'd done it before, but never in this particular area. It was a remote forested region in western Oregon that my uncle had once mentioned during a family gathering. He said there were trails out there that almost no one used anymore. I'm not some extreme outdoorsman, but I've always been comfortable in the woods. Grew up fishing, hiking, even did a few solo overnighters in college. So I packed light but efficiently: tent, mini propane stove, flashlight, multi-tool, pepper spray, 2 lighters, a tarp, and a few other basics. I even brought a cheap Bluetooth speaker for music at night. There was no cell service once you left the paved road, which I guess should have been a red flag in hindsight. The drive took a few hours. I arrived mid-afternoon and found a small dirt pull-off with a faded wooden marker, no signage, just a weather-worn post. It looked like people used to hike there, but not anymore. I parked, threw my pack on, and started the hike in. The trail was overgrown but still passable. It took me nearly 2 hours to find a clearing that seemed flat and dry enough to set up my tent. It was quiet out there, like, unnaturally quiet. I figured it was just because of how deep in the woods I was. I set up camp, boiled some water, made one of those freeze-dried meals, and let the day settle into that familiar, peaceful rhythm you get when you're far from everything. Around dusk, I set up the tarp, lit my mini lantern, and played a little music just loud enough to feel like I wasn't totally alone. The temperature dropped faster than I expected. I sat near the small campfire I'd built, listening to the crickets and wind moving through the trees. But right around nightfall, the soundscape changed. The crickets stopped, and even the breeze seemed to die off. It's the kind of silence that feels like it has weight. I remember checking my watch, 8:52 p.m., and thinking that maybe I was just being paranoid. I told myself I was fine, that I'd done this before. But then, I heard it. A slow, deliberate crunch of leaves somewhere out in the darkness. Then silence again. It wasn't an animal. I know the difference. This had rhythm to it. Heavy. Controlled. At first, I assumed maybe someone else had decided to camp nearby. That happens. Maybe I just hadn't noticed them on the trail. But when I stepped out from under the tarp with my flashlight and aimed it toward the woods, there was nothing. Just trees, fog, and that thick kind of darkness that swallows up the beam past a certain distance. I called out, not loudly, but just enough to let whoever it was know I was aware. "Hey, are you good out there?" I asked. Nothing. Total silence. The weird part? I didn't feel scared yet. Just on edge. Like something was just off. I brushed it off, crawled back into my tent, zipped it up, and lay still for a while, trying to read a paperback I'd brought. About 15 minutes later, I heard it again. Not steps this time. Music. Soft. Faint. But unmistakable. It was an old song, maybe 40 jazz or something, but it didn't sound like it was coming from a phone or speaker. It had that tinny, echoing quality, like an old gramophone. It was so out of place it made me feel disoriented. I stepped outside again, barefoot on the cold dirt, listening hard. That's when I realized something that still bothers me to this day. The song was looping. The same verse over and over. In the chorus. And it was getting slightly louder. I stood still, trying to figure out where the music was coming from. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to tell it was some kind of old jazz recording, repeating the same few notes over and over. I moved a little closer to the edge of the trees, my flashlight cutting through the dark, but the beam hit nothing but branches and fog. The moment I stepped forward, the music cut off. Just stopped, like someone flipped a switch. I waited, listening hard. Total silence. Even the usual night sounds were gone. I backed up slowly toward my tent, sweeping the flashlight from side to side. Still nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting the light, no hint of another person. I sat under the tarp for a while, clutching the light and staring into the woods. My body was tense. Every shadow looked like it could move. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be a weird echo, maybe even my own music bouncing back from the trees. I crawled back into the tent, zipped it shut, and left the flashlight on. I lay there for a long time, wide awake, heart racing. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, it was cold. The flashlight had turned off. The tent zipper was open halfway. I sat up fast, my stomach in knots. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I always zip it all the way up and lock the pull tabs together. I listened. No footsteps. No wind. Just the same dead quiet. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The fire I had made was out, just ashes. I turned toward the tarp area and saw something resting on my cooler. It was a shirt. Not mine. A plain white t-shirt, folded neatly, with writing on the front in black marker. It said, "Wrong spot." I didn't think. I just started breaking down the camp. Tent half-folded, tarp soaked, I didn't care. I stuffed it all into my bag and took off down the trail. The fog was thicker now, and the trees seemed closer together. I walked fast, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. No sounds behind me. No voices. But the tension in my chest kept building. After about 20 minutes, I heard the music again. Same song. Same creepy loop. But now it was closer. Not distant like before. It sounded like it was just behind the trees to my left. I spun around with the flashlight and scanned everything, but there was nothing. No person. No light. Just that warped jazz melody playing, skipping, repeating the same notes again and again. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't stop until I saw the wooden marker by the road. My car was right where I left it. No signs of anything out of place. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there with my hands shaking on the wheel. The music had stopped. But I still didn't feel safe. I didn't feel alone. I sat in the car with the engine off, gripping the wheel with both hands. The woods around me were still, the same unnatural silence hanging over everything. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking up behind the car. But there was nothing. Just trees and fog. After sitting for what felt like forever, I turned the key and started the engine. The headlights lit up the narrow trail ahead. I started driving slowly, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. I kept thinking about that shirt left on the cooler, the words written on it. Wrong spot. My stomach wouldn't settle. I'd been driving for maybe 5 minutes when I saw it, a car, parked partially off the trail. An old, beat-up station wagon, covered in dirt and rust. It didn't look abandoned, but it definitely hadn't been there earlier. The windows were tinted or maybe just dirty. I couldn't see inside. I passed it without stopping, but it unsettled me. Something about it felt out of place. I kept going. More turns. More fog. The trail looked unfamiliar now, even though it was the same one I had driven hours before. Everything seemed off. Then I saw the same car again. I slammed the brakes. It was identical, same rust spots, same cracked windshield. There was no way I could have missed a turn or circled back. The road was straight. I stared at the car as I passed again, this time slower. No one inside. No movement. I kept going faster now. And then, the third time, there it was Aga. Same car. Same position. That's when the fear truly hit. I stopped the vehicle in the middle of the trail. No music, no voices, but something was very wrong. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and walked a few steps into the woods, thinking maybe I'd see something that would explain what was happening. That's when I heard the music. It was closer this time. Clearer. The same old jazz melody, warped and skipping. I turned toward the sound, and my flashlight landed on something that made me freeze. A person. Standing between the trees. They weren't moving. Just standing there, barely lit by the edge of the beam. Head tilted, like they were listening too. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel them staring. I backed away without turning around, every step measured and slow. When I reached the car, I got in, locked the doors, and turned on the engine. I looked up again. The figure was gone. So was the music. I didn't wait. I drove as fast as I could down the trail until the trees broke and I hit pavement. My phone buzzed with a few delayed texts the moment I got signal. I didn't answer. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station on the edge of the nearest town. It was almost dawn. The sky had just started to lighten, but everything still looked gray and lifeless. I parked near the side of the building and sat there for a while with the engine running. My hands were locked around the steering wheel, and even though I was out of the woods, I didn't feel safe. Inside the station, I used the bathroom sink to wash my face. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Eyes wide and bloodshot, dirt on my neck, a scratch across my cheek I hadn't noticed before. I bought a coffee and stood near the front window watching the empty highway, still half expecting that old station wagon to pull up behind me. Eventually, I got back in the car and checked my phone. I had signal now. Text from my mom, a missed call from a friend. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't know what to say. I thought about calling the police, about filing a report. But what would I even tell them? That someone left a shirt on my cooler? That I heard music in the woods? That I saw a car that kept reappearing like it was following me? None of it would have sounded real. It didn't even sound real to me. I went home and didn't unpack for 2 days. My tent stayed crumpled in the back seat. I kept the car locked at all times, even in my own driveway. I didn't sleep much that week. Every sound outside made me sit up in bed. I kept checking the windows, looking out into the yard. But there was never anything there. For a while I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. Stress from losing my job, the isolation, maybe I was just too deep in unfamiliar woods and let my imagination get carried away. But a few weeks later, something happened that pulled me right back into it. I was walking out to my car early one morning and noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. At first I thought it was a flyer or a parking warning. But when I pulled it out, it was a piece of notebook paper. Folded once. No envelope. I opened it and found one sentence written in black marker, the exact same handwriting that had been on the shirt. It said, "Right spot this time." That was it. No signature. No explanation. I looked around, scanning the street, the sidewalk, the trees across from my house. I live in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing looked out of place. But my heart was pounding. I stood there for a long time, gripping that note, trying to understand what it meant. If they had followed me. If they had been watching. If they were still watching now. I bought a new lock for the front door that afternoon. Installed security cameras. Changed my routines. I haven't gone camping since. I haven't even gone hiking. Sometimes I still hear that same music in my head when I'm lying in bed at night. Not loud. Just soft enough that I question if it's real or if my brain is filling in the silence. But I can't forget that moment in the woods. That message. That figure standing still in the dark. And I can't shake the feeling that whoever it was out there, they weren't lost. They weren't confused. They knew exactly where they were. And they wanted me to know they could find me again. Back in 2018, I took a short solo trip through northern Arizona. Nothing dramatic or overly ambitious. Just a quiet getaway after a rough few months of non-stop work and stress. I was 28 at the time, and had just come off a breakup that left me drained in ways I didn't fully understand until I was alone. I had always loved the outdoors and figured a few days surrounded by desert trails and red rock silence would help clear my head. I camped in my car mostly. A used Subaru Outback I had set up with a mattress in the back and blackout shades for the windows. My plan was simple. drive out to a few of the more remote hiking spots, park where it was allowed, spend the night, wake up with the sun, move on. I wasn't documenting the trip on social media. I didn't tell many people where I was going. That was kind of the point. On the third night, I found a dirt pull-off near a lesser-known trailhead inside a national monument. It was the kind of spot that didn't see many visitors, too far from the scenic photo ops and paved campgrounds. I arrived late in the afternoon, no other vehicles in sight, and hiked for a few hours before returning to the car to settle in for the night. The silence was thick in that place, not heavy with life like a forest but dry and still like the landscape itself was holding its breath. I lay in the back of the car, back hatch slightly cracked for air, listening to the sound of nothing. Eventually I drifted off. I woke up sometime after mid. At first I thought it was just the kind of half-waking that happens when you're not used to sleeping in a vehicle. But then I noticed the light. A dim yellowish glow flickering against the ceiling of the car. My first thought was that I'd left something on, a flashlight or maybe the stove, but then I realized it was moving. The glow wasn't coming from inside the car, it was coming from outside. I stayed perfectly still and listened. The windows were tinted but not blacked out. I could still see shapes if I pressed my face to the glass. I slowly shifted to my side and peeked through the corner of the back window. There was someone standing about 20 feet from the car, holding a lantern. Not a flashlight. Not a headlamp. A lantern. The kind you see in old photos. Metal frame, glass sides, flame flickering inside. They weren't walking or pacing. Just standing there. Facing the car. Not moving. I couldn't make out much else. Their clothes looked dark. Could have been a man. Could have been a woman. Could have been someone young or old. The lantern light distorted everything, casting long thin shadows that stretched along the ground like roots. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. Every nerve in my body lit up, the kind of tension that makes your teeth hurt. After what felt like a full minute, the figure turned and walked slowly into the darkness. No rush. Just gone. I waited another 10 minutes before sitting up. My hands were shaking. I checked the doors. Still locked. Nothing had been touched. I leaned over to the front seat and started the engine, headlights sweeping across the empty trail ahead. But I didn't leave. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of seeming paranoid. Maybe I convinced myself it was just some random hiker. A camper walking back from a late-night bathroom trip. But that lantern, it didn't belong out there. Not in 2018. Not in the middle of nowhere. I turned the engine off and lay back down. Eventually I fell asleep again. But I woke up once more. This time it wasn't light that woke me. It was the sound of gravel crunching just outside my window. The sound of gravel was slow and steady, not random, not natural. It had rhythm. Footsteps. Someone circling the car. I stayed completely still, heart pounding. The back windows were dark enough to hide me, but if they leaned in close, they could probably see something. I didn't dare move. The steps stopped near the passenger side. I held my breath, listening, waiting for a knock or a tug at the handle. Nothing. Just silence. Then, slowly, the steps continued, fading toward the woods. I stayed frozen for at least 10 more minutes. When I finally sat up and peeked through the front windshield, the lot was empty. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Headlights on. Still no one. I should have left. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was another camper. Harmless. Lost, maybe? But that lantern I'd seen hours earlier still haunted me. Who hikes with a lantern? By morning, I stepped out to check the ground. On the passenger side, faint footprints were pressed into the dirt. I stared at them for a while. The prints weren't sharp, but they were human. Someone had definitely been there. I left that trailhead and drove to another spot a few hours away. A high-altitude lake with a few open camping areas. It was quiet, cold, and completely empty. I parked near the water and spent the afternoon walking the area, trying to shake off the unease. For a while it worked. That was until I returned to my car and noticed something in the clearing nearby, a perfect circle of small rocks, about 10 feet wide. I hadn't seen it earlier. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I walked over, examined it. No obvious footprints. No drag marks. Just the circle. I kicked it apart, heart racing. I stared at the tree-line, scanning for movement. Nothing. That night I didn't sleep. I locked the doors and kept my keys in hand. No footsteps. No music. No light. Just the kind of silence that feels planned. And somehow, that made everything worse. The next day I left early. Didn't even bother with breakfast. I didn't want to spend another minute near that lake. I drove for hours through dusty backroads and arrived at the last trail on my list just before sunset. This one was even more remote, a narrow gravel pull-off with no signage, no cell service, and no other cars in sight. I hesitated for a second before deciding to park and rest there for the night. The air felt different at that elevation. Colder. Still. I told myself it would be fine, just one more night. I didn't hike this time. I stayed close to the car, made a quick dinner on the portable stove and sat in the hatch with the back open, trying to relax. The sun dipped behind the hills fast, and the dark moved in quicker than I expected. I shut the car and climbed into the back with the windows cracked slightly to keep air moving. I didn't fall asleep easily. I kept imagining things outside the glass. Every time I heard a twig snap or the wind shift, I sat up and listened. But nothing happened for a long time. I must have fallen asleep eventually because when I woke up the inside of the car was pitch black. I checked my phone but the screen stayed blank. Battery dead. My heart rate jumped. I was already on edge from the last few nights, and now I had no way of checking the time or calling for help if something went wrong. I sat up slowly and looked out the window. There was someone standing in the middle of the dirt road. They weren't facing me. They were standing sideways to the car, just standing still like they were waiting for something. No flashlight. No movement. Just a dark figure lit only by the faint silver outline of moonlight through the trees. I ducked down without thinking. My hands were shaking and I could barely breathe. I stayed like that for a long time. When I finally worked up the courage to peek again, the road was empty. But that didn't make me feel any better. I locked all the doors again and grabbed the small knife I kept under the seat. I sat there in total silence, every muscle in my body tensed. Then came the sound that still sticks with me the most. The slow tap of a finger against glass. Not the back window. Not the driver's side. The passenger window. It wasn't aggressive. Just slow. Deliberate. Tap. 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 I turned my head as slowly as I could and saw nothing at first. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw the shape of a hand resting gently on the glass. 5 fingers spread wide. The palm pressed lightly like they were trying to feel the temperature of the window. I couldn't see the face. Only the hand and the shoulder. Whoever it was didn't try to open the door. Didn't speak. Just stood there with their hand flat against the glass. I didn't move. I just stared until the hand pulled away and the figure walked calmly back into the trees. No flashlight. No sound of branches breaking. Just gone. I stayed frozen until dawn. When the sun finally came up, I stepped out and looked around. No footprints. No sign of anyone. But on the window where the hand had been pressed, I saw something. A single word written in the condensation. Stay. I wiped it away and drove off without looking back. I never went back to the desert after that. I cut the trip short and drove straight home, ignoring the rest of my plan. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. I couldn't figure out how to explain it without sounding paranoid, or worse, unstable. For weeks, I kept thinking I'd see something in the mirror behind me. Hear that same slow tapping at my apartment window. I left the blinds down, kept the lights on at night. I told myself I was just shaken up. But something about that last night never left me. I started researching missing persons reports in that region. At first, it felt like just a compulsion, a way to stay connected to the fear, maybe even make sense of it. But then I started seeing patterns. Not solid proof. Just names. Locations. People who went off the grid in the same areas I had visited. No foul play. No answers. What scared me the most wasn't the hand on the glass, or even the word, stay. It was how quiet it all was. How slow. Deliberate. Whoever it was, whatever they were doing, it wasn't random. It felt practiced. Like they'd done this before. Maybe many times. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better if they had tried to hurt me. If it had been violent, or loud, or chaotic. Because then I'd have something to point to. A reason to be afraid. But all I have is silence. A face I never saw. A message I'll never understand. People always assume horror is about blood or screams or things that chase you. But there's another kind, the kind that waits. Watches. The kind that does nothing but still finds a way inside you. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike alone. And even now, years later, I still check the windows before I sleep. Not because I think they're coming back, but because part of me is afraid they never left.
Sometimes the scariest moments aren't loud or violent. They're quiet, slow, personal. If you've ever felt like you were being watched, or sensed something was wrong without any proof, you're not alone. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. If anything like this has ever happened to you, tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Think twice before heading into the woods alone. Because out there, you never really know who or what might be watching.